Good afternoon. My name is Paul Charnier. I'm the editorial page editor at the Day newspaper, and I welcome you to this week's Lunch with the Candidates, where we'll be discussing the issues in the 2016 election. Today's discussion is with the candidates in the 38th General Assembly District, which covers Waterford and section of Montville. Three candidates today are the Democrat, Sharon, the Republican incumbent representative, Kathleen McCarty, and Green Party candidate, Lauren Shaw. I'm joined by Martha Shanahan, the Day staff writer who covers the town of Waterford and Montville. We'll just be discussing the issues for the next hour, and we'll give our candidates a chance at the end to provide their summaries. So with that, we're going to go right to our first question, and it's to Representative McCarty. Under the current budget, state budget, Waterford took a big hit with a $1 million cut in state education cost-sharing funding. Did electing a freshman Republican to represent the district end up hurting the district when it came to the fight for state education funds?
Thank you. First, may I just thank the Day for this opportunity with the interview today, and to my two opponents for agreeing to be here. And I'm very pleased that you asked that question. As you know, the state has not met its responsibilities on education, and the ECS grant is the largest state education grant at $2 billion, which is currently underfunded by over $600 million. But I believe that the Republican budget, of which I put forward an amendment, restored the education budget of $1 million to the town of Waterford, which was a very high cut, education cost sharing cut. But it wasn't because I was a freshman legislator. I'm well known, even at the state level, serving on the education committee as someone who fights for education and understands the needs of education in our community. It was really because of the failed policies of the Democrat majority party that they had to go back repeatedly with deficit mitigation plans, and to look for cost savings, they attacked education. This was not acceptable. In one regard, I'm pleased to see the court case that is pending, because I do think there is a lot of inequity still present in the state of Connecticut when it comes to distributing education funds. So in essence, in a shorter answer, it was not because I was a freshman legislator. It was because the state is facing these pressures on the on budget in general, that education was attacked. And I plan to go back and fight for it and get the education right in the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Ms. Shaw, any comment on the how the state goes about funding education in Connecticut, and the fact that Waterford in particular saw a big hit in the last session when it came to education funding?
I would also like to thank the Day for hosting us today, and for my opponents for coming out. It's lovely to see everyone speak about the issues. In particular, in regards to Waterford's education cuts, as Ms. McCarty mentioned, the CJEF case, which spoke about the inequity in our school funding system, pointed out that not all of the public school systems are receiving funding as they should be, and the fact that Waterford took a $1 million cut on top of other municipal aid cuts was really unacceptable, and I would have liked to see more of a push to have that funding restored.
And Sharon Palmer?
Sure. And I, as well, would like to thank you for providing this opportunity for the three of us to be here today. There are lots of angles, so to speak, to this story of the cut to education aid for Waterford and many other towns. Obviously, from my perspective, and I believe to my opponent's perspective, it's unacceptable. And there are many factors, as I said, that go into it. First of all, the CJF case has been mentioned, and that pointed up all the inequities that we have in the current system. This is our third round with this. Barnaby Horton, who's still a friend of mine, I think was 8 years old when his dad filed that suit. He became an attorney, is now at Merrill Lynch, but is still an advocate for education equity as a long-serving adult in Hartford activity. I find this particularly unacceptable because, in essence, we have never had a cut this large, and there isn't any reason for it. And I'm going to get a little bit snarky here, as I sometimes do. And I would say that if we still had Andrea Stillman and Melody Peters and Betsy Ritter representing us, that would never have happened. And I hope to continue with the legacy that they have left to us and continue as a representative for the 38th in the tradition that they have left to us.
Representative McCarty, just, it's true that the driving problem was the funding issue and the budget issue is why education was being cut, but it was only cut in some areas. Other areas actually got increases. And your opponent says, effectively, did you drop the ball in that your district got hit hard while others did better?
Right. I think it's interesting, if you listen closely to my opponent's words, you hear that it was politically motivated, which I think we should transcend political motivation when it comes to educating our students. If you look at the cuts that were given throughout the state, they almost all have R's. Doesn't stand for rookie, it stands for Republican. And I, again, resent it. I've worked very hard locally for over 20 years to protect education in Waterford, and this damaged greatly our property tax will go up if we don't find ways within the budget. But because of that, we've had to make some great sacrifices on the local school board budget. Again, the Republican budget that I hope I'll have an opportunity to explain a little later did not cut education at all. All of the education grant formulas stayed the same and were returned to the municipal level. So again, I think it was politically motivated, and it was done by the majority party, which is a one-party rule in the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, before I give Ms. Palmer a chance to respond, Ms. Shaw, do you want to comment also? You're nodding your head on what you've heard so far here?
I absolutely agree with both my opponents. It was partisan politics motivated. However, it's the duty of the representative to transcend that and work across the aisle in order to restore funding for her constituents. So I believe both of them are right. However, Ms. McCarty still dropped her obligation on making sure we had the adequate amount of funding for our schools.
Ms. Palmer, reacting to Representative McCarty's contention that sounds like you're just talking about power politics again rather than kind of a fair funding, who can fight for the most funding. Could you comment on her criticism of the politics of it?
Well, I'm not sure that it was politically motivated, but that is the assertion that she has made. I think that the motivation at this point is pretty much irrelevant because we sustained a significant cut that was not able to be restored, and that's what people need to look at. The CJEF case will move forward, and it will hopefully, even though it is our third shot at this as a state, get to some solutions where we aren't arguing with one another whether it was political or not political and why town X got this cut, town Y got a different cut, and that sort of thing. I would hope that that would end. But the reality is we are where we are, and this is going to continue until that's resolved.
All right. Thank the candidates. A lot of discussion on that first question. Our next question is from Martha Shanahan, and it's to Sharon Palmer.
Many people see state unions as the problem with benefits that are too costly and exceed what many in the private sector receive. As a former state labor commissioner, do you think that those perceptions are fair? And would you be prepared if you were elected to find a way to cut labor costs?
It's a double question. I think that the cost of labor in Connecticut is high. The cost of benefits in Connecticut are high, and that's not just for unionized employees. That's for all employees. We certainly have to work very hard at what's happening with our health care costs. I know that wages have been essentially stagnated, remained flat, I would say, for the last 20 years for workers in general, whether they were unionized or not. I think that we need to look at everything in this budget crisis. We're looking at $1 billion. And I would hope and I would advocate that everyone comes to the table. Everyone. And that we come to solutions that everyone can live with and will contribute to a solution for that $1 billion deficit.
Representative McCarty, it was a two-part question. One, the perception among many in the private sector that the benefits provided state labor union workers exceed what they receive, and they have to help pay the bill for that. And is part of the budget solution cutting labor costs, and would you prepare to do that if it is?
Well, thank you for that question as well. The labor costs, the health benefits, and the benefits that the labor unions are receiving at the state level make up 1/3 of the state budget. This is not sustainable. The Republicans have put forward a plan called the Pathway to Sustainability, which outlines how we have to correct this problem, and it offers structural changes in the budget. The unions need to come to the table and realize that these are hard, challenging fiscal times, and that we need to come together to find solutions so that we can not be coming back repeatedly at the state level trying to fix the deficit mitigation plans. These benefits are not in keeping with the private sector. I think they're 45% more. And if the Office of Fiscal Analysis has pointed out that if we don't do something about this, that we can expect $1 billion to $3 billion in deficits annually over the next 5 years. So it's really urgent. We have to come to the table and start to speak in a bipartisan way so that we can correct these problems. I just would like to remind the viewers that the Republican Party has not been invited to negotiations. It's a one-party rule that has existed in the state of Connecticut for many, many years now, and this disenfranchises a good 50% of the voters, or close to 50%, who have put Republicans in place to help keep the dialogue going forward. This is a huge problem. We have to get it right. Structural changes need to take place within the budget if we're going to correct this. So thank you.
Thank you. Lauren Shaw.
Yes, thank you. I would like to just respond to the last part of my opponent's message. While the Republicans have not been invited to the table, neither have any third parties, which I'd also like to remind viewers are constantly being disenfranchised as well. But to the point of whether the perception of labor and the funding is fair, I would say most likely not. It does require much more mitigation than has been taking place. And I believe to fund most of this, we need a new structure in place rather than just tax and spend. And I would put forward a solution of public banking.
You want to expound on that a little bit?
So public banking uses both private and public funds in order to invest into different ventures, which then yield higher returns than regular banking methods or the way that we tax and spend now here in Connecticut.
All right. Just to follow up, if we could go down the line to our candidates related to the labor question. Right now in Connecticut, state labor contracts, the legislature can opt to vote on them, or they can opt not to vote on them. Is that the way it should be, or should the legislature vote on whether to approve labor contracts? And if we could kind of go down the line, starting with you,
Sure,
Ms.
sure.
Palmer.
I still believe that it needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. Many of the contracts that are negotiated are solidly agreed to by both sides, so that you're just taking up time by taking that vote, because you know from the position of the parties that it's going to sail through or it's going to fail. It's pretty obvious going into the situation. what the outcome is going to be. Occasionally there is a significant controversy. And I think in those cases where people recognize that a vote needs to be taken. Just to take a vote for the sake of taking a vote without any difference in the outcome, quite frankly, is a waste of time. And as we all know, they go right up to the last gong at midnight on the last night in deciding legislative issues. So I would say it's unnecessary, though it might be something that people would like to see just for the sake of having it. But I don't know if that's worthwhile, quite frankly.
Representative McCarty?
Well, I tend to disagree with that assessment. I think it is worthwhile. We just recently saw with some of the contracts that went forward with UConn that they were asked to come back and to revisit some of their planning. So I think the legislature has a role in this. It works very well on the local level. And Sharon, you can probably agree to this. We do have, when we negotiate the Board of Ed and the RTM, it goes forward for a vote there. So I do not see why at the state level the legislature should have that opportunity. It will help to rein in some of the costs if they're able to say, look, the state cannot afford these contracts at this time, come back with a different plan. It's part of the reason we're in the trouble we're in. Lauren said it, we're just spending more than we're taking in, and we can't continue in this fashion. So I would say that the legislature does have that right. It is currently in statute, and that it should exercise it so that we can keep the spending under control. It may, Sharon did point out, it may not always be necessary, but in the last, I can't remember when it was invoked. So we need to really start, other than looking at the UConn contracts, it's never used, even though it's there. Thank you.
Ms. Shaw?
Yes, I'm disheartened by my opponent's clear reliance on partisan politics in her mention of whether or not something will get through just on party lines. That is extremely disheartening to myself. And I believe that really the issue can be summed up very simply. We're talking about the allocation of public funds that should be mitigated by the representatives of the public every time.
Next question goes to Ms. Shaw for myself. Do you support the implementation of a toll system to help repair and modernize the state's transportation system? And what should be the priority when it comes to investing in transportation?
Two-part question. So, do I support the tolls? On the surface of how it's been proposed so far, I do not. However, I can see that there might be merit to it. I don't believe that, adding tax upon tax or toll upon toll is what's going to get us out of our deficit issues. It's really a spending issue. And as far as funding to infrastructure, or transportation rather, transportation, allocation of transportation funds should really be spent more on the highways and repairing and finishing projects that we've already started so that we can start moving forward away from some of those more failed projects.
Was there any specific reassurances or situations where you would support tolls? It sounded like you were leaving a door open.
It would depend specifically on what's being proposed, though for the most part I don't believe that adding a toll to, say, for instance, the borders of Connecticut would really do much to help with our spending issues.
All right. Ms. Farmer?
Sure. On the question of tolls, I think we have to do a careful analysis of the pluses and minuses. I'm sure if we look back historically, most of us will remember or have read about the crashes that occurred that actually brought about Connecticut taking down its tolls. However, if we look around us now, most other states, in fact, I believe all of the New England states, have some version of tolls. I'm not sure that the revenue totally offsets the expense of putting up the tolls, repairing the tolls, monitoring the tolls, and doing all that goes with that sort of program. So initially I would say we have to have a careful analysis of the benefit. We're talking about, if I remember correctly, $100 billion in cost. So we have to watch very carefully what we spend our money on and make it worthwhile. I wouldn't totally throw it out the window, but I think it's a long shot, quite frankly, here in Connecticut. And we've got to set up priorities. What should we do first, second, third, and why? For instance, in southeastern Connecticut, the first issue that always comes to mind is Route 11. I think it'll probably be many years still before we finish Route 11. But the bulk of the accidents occur where 95 and 395 come together. So if we're talking about priorities, perhaps we can start there and improve that area more than we already have, so that fewer accidents occur there. And of course, there's always the issue of widening and adding a lane. You can't do that everywhere all at once. So again, prioritize. Where would that give the most benefit to the traffic, so that we would reduce the accidents that occur there, and also provide better access for all that commercial traffic that's traveling on Route 95 through our state.
And Representative McCarty, again, the question was your position on tolls and what priorities you would have for transportation improvements.
Transportation is a major issue for us in the state of Connecticut. We need to improve our infrastructure. There's no doubt, both with the rail, with buses, throughout in all areas, infrastructure and transportation needs improvement. But I am not an advocate of tolls. I think we've put forward a transportation plan that will cost $70 billion over the next 30 years, that will target areas within the transportation infrastructure that will make the improvements without tolls. I would say in response that tolls are better than a mileage tax that had been looked at. So we need to be creative. We need to work together to correct our transportation issues. I know a lot of talk has taken place regarding the area right here in Waterford and East Lyme. That seems to be a treacherous spot on I-95. You notice anyone who travels from this area to New York or vice versa realizes that the traffic is very congested there. So I would make that a high priority, looking to how we can alleviate some of those issues there. But overall, I think that we can, with smart planning and prioritizing our projects, that we would not have to go as far as in putting tolls back. Thank you.
All right. Next question is to Representative McCarty.
Yeah. This question sort of goes back to education funding. And it's about one of the biggest and more complicated issues with the Waterford town budget this past year, which was over sort of uncertainty and back and forth over whether the Friendship School, which is the magnet school in Waterford that takes students from both New London and Waterford, would continue to get support from the state. Do you want to just sort of briefly explain why there was so much confusion and back and forth over whether the Friendship School would get support from the state and from the state budget, and also tell parents who depend on that school what they can expect in the next couple of years?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. The Friendship School is very important to all of us here in the district. It's the first urban suburban magnet school in the state of Connecticut that really brings together children, pre-K children through kindergarten from New London and Waterford. I was very instrumental early on in bringing the Friendship School. I was on the governance board of the Friendship School for over a decade, and it took a lot of planning to have this project brought in. And it was brought because we realized the true necessity of offering a pre-K education to our children. There's so many beneficial aspects to a pre-K, but above and beyond that, I think it's absolutely fantastic that we were able to introduce young children that could experience diversity and different cultures together. And the long-standing partnerships that we have built with the parents is going to have wonderful effects for years to come. So I'm very proud of that project. I can tell you that at the state level, again, with all of the cuts, this is a RESC school. I just want to preface by saying that the Friendship School is a magnet school, but it's run by Learn. And so the funding mechanism for the preschools is somewhat different than it is for other magnet schools. And so that is why I introduced a piece of legislation to look at some of the parity in magnet school funding. In my opinion, this school meets some of the same criteria that the Chef O'Neill schools meet in other areas of the state. So it would be my hope that I could work, and I've already brought up the superintendents and Learn to Hartford to meet with the Office of Early Education Commissioner. I have plans to meet with the Commissioner of Education to see if there's room within available appropriations. I'm not looking to come back. Everyone has a story in the state that we need more money, but within available appropriations to make this equitable so that our pre-K students are not left out. This is an ongoing issue as far as the Board of Education, and I knew the perception would be in the community. They did say that unless there's available appropriation coming back from the state, they were not certain of the viability of the school given the massive other cuts, which I still claim should not have taken place and will not. If we elect more of the Republicans to the legislature who are valuing education, that I'm planning to work on this funding mechanism so that we can maintain the school as a pre-K through K school. The town of Waterford, as you know, through the contract that was made, the state built the school. So if it were no longer to be a school, the town of Waterford would owe clearly $10 million back to the state. That will not happen. There's a plan. We're looking at all kinds of alternatives to maintain it as a school, but my major focus would be to keep it as a pre-K K magnet school. And I may end by just saying years ago, even in a town like Waterford, that some people actually think it's a wealthy town, there are plenty of families in Waterford that rely on this early childhood education school. And the district profiles from years ago would show you that we were very low down in the state as far as families that were sending their children to preschool education, which the benefits are long-lasting. As I said, you save cost savings going into the future with remedial work and special education. So it's a win-win. I think we really have to maintain the Friendship School, and I'm going to do everything. I'm going to really go down fighting and kicking on this one. This is a benefit.
Yeah,
Thank you. Excuse me.
Yeah. Ms. Shaw, comment about the concerns about Friendship School, its future viability.
I absolutely agree that early education is imperative to having a healthy and, well, progressing society, to be quite honest. And I believe that whomever shall be elected should really try to fight and make sure that we obtain the funds necessary to keep this pre-K to K institution.
All right. Thank you. And Ms. Palmer.
Well, I think we're all in agreement on this issue. The Friendship School is a gem. And as a citizen of Waterford, I've lived here for more than 40 years, it's something that I'm very proud of because we were ahead of the curve in putting forth the idea for that school, working with surrounding towns to make that happen. And it would be a shame if that were not to continue. It's something that we should, if anything, expand the program. It showed the rest of the state how communities could come together and come up with a wonderful program. And we all know how important early childhood education has become, much more so than years ago. There was no early childhood education. We've learned the value of it, we've learned the difference that it makes in children's lives, and we certainly should not let that slip away. Perhaps we should analyze what we have to make sure we're allocating our funds properly, that they're going to all segments of the state, but I too would fight as hard as I could to maintain that school, because I think it's very important to not only the 39th district, but all of southeastern Connecticut.
Another local issue, and this we'll begin with Ms. Palmer on this one. The Malloy administration's plans for Seaside. Wondering if you support the current concept, which is to try to find a private partner that the state would work with to try to save and rehabilitate the historic buildings there for use as park lodging, and to have beach access, and try to use that private funding to help pay for and maintain the park. If you're so, basically, are you supportive of the administration's current plans for the park or not?
Well, I think the jury is out on that. There was a public hearing recently in Waterford, and a variety of possibilities were put forth. Audience members got an opportunity to respond and give their opinions, but most of the folks said we need to see more. And I think they're right. We need to see how much all these options would cost. I think the decision has been made that it's going to be a park. So the question becomes, what kind of park are we going to have? And it ran the gamut of options as put forth. But the specifics are not there. So we have to put some meat on the bones, so to speak, so the public can weigh in a second time and have an opportunity to respond to those options that were put out in sort of a framework at this first hearing.
And just to follow, and something for the other candidates to consider, as a local representative, you have people that want to use the facility that don't necessarily live in your district. You serve them as well, the state does, but you may have maybe local neighbors that have a different view of it. So how do you weigh those competing interests between the general public and those who might be more directly impacted?
Well, ultimately, it would be a state park, as Governor Malloy has put forth, so that it would serve more than just the population of Waterford as it was presented. I think the interests of Waterford, however, and Montville as well, which is part of the district, should be taken into consideration very strongly, because on a day-to-day basis, it's the residents of the district who will be impacted the most by whatever is determined to be the outcome of the plan. But it's a balancing act. You have to balance the interests of the local people and balance the interests of the community surrounding the area, and balance with the interests of the state of Connecticut. So that's not an easy job, and we're just starting, I think. This is, the third try, I believe, to get to the point where we're going to have some solid options. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those specifics are and trying to talk with the residents of the district and figure out what we believe to be best for the region.
Thank you. Representative McCarty, if you could express your views on what do you think of the administration's vision for Seaside going forward.
Thank you. Well, first, let me begin by saying I certainly did not appreciate the process of how we got to where we are, with the state coming in and declaring that it would become a state park. But we won't go into all of that. We are where we are, as Mrs. Palmer said earlier. So with that, I can say that Seaside is a treasure. It's a jewel. It's an extraordinary piece of land in the state of Connecticut with 32 acres of beautiful waterfront. I do believe that regardless of whichever plan goes forward, the beauty is that there will be public access down to Long Island Sound. I think that's important that people can enjoy the beauty of the area and the region, so I'm pleased with that aspect of it. I've been engaged, very engaged from the very beginning about Seaside. I live right there, so I'm one of those residents in that region. I would like to just point out that the community in the area, they are open to a public-private partnership. I think the problem, even with the earlier proposal, was that the scope of the plan just kept growing and growing, and it made it very difficult for them at that point to accept. This plan, however, there are 3 plans, as was pointed out. We did have the public scoping hearing recently. There will be a public hearing going forward. There is no decision yet made on which one of the 3 plans would be the most optimal. I do question, however, how the feasibility, that where is the state going to find the funding, given that we just cut $1.8 million from the state parks, and we had to forego Family Day right over at Harkness this year because of the lack of funding. So the looming question is, where is the funding going to come? I actually happen to be a strong advocate for trying to preserve the Cass Gilbert, the main building. It's an historical building. We should be very proud to have such a renowned architect who built here in Waterford. But again, the problem is, where is the funding going to come for? A public-private partnership. The state still needs to put forward a sizable amount of money to have the buildings ready for a developer to come in. The unfortunate part about this piece is that now the town of Waterford will no longer be the beneficiary of the tax base. It would turn to the state, and given the record, I'm hoping that if there's any possibility of gaining any funding there, that it would stay within the state park fund and not go back into the general fund. But that's a long way off. I think right now the important part is that whatever plan goes forward, that it respects the town of Waterford's conservation plan, it respects the community, and that we find a way to make it possible.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Lauren Shaw?
Yes. I would say that when speaking about funding specifically, this public-private partnership is exactly what a public banking system would address. And as Ms. McCarty pointed out, I would also like to see some sort of partnership where the town of Waterford also benefits. However, I do believe that the way that the project has been handled so far, we are going to have difficulties finding developers. And in addition to Waterford's current struggle with another developer in another part of the town, I think it'll be very difficult to proceed in a way that benefits everybody, and that also, very importantly, preserves the ecological aspects of the Seaside Park. So in general, I've seen the 3 different proposals. I would like to see more done, more work, more development on those proposals so that we can have a better idea of how it will actually be developed and whether or not they are an acceptable choice for that piece of land.
All right. Thank you. Our next question is to Lauren Shaw.
You mentioned a little while ago a lack of support for third-party candidates and elected officials. Why do you think that third parties have had so much trouble gaining traction with voters? And the second part is, what would you say to voters to convince them that they're not wasting a vote by casting it for a third-party candidate?
Thank you for that question. I think a lot of it has to do with the barriers put in place by the Democrats and the Republicans in the legislation. As you may know, we have a public financing option for campaigns, and the barriers placed on third-party and minor party candidates are non-existent for the other 2 parties. So that limits our ability to get out our message, and I do appreciate media sources like The Day who reach out to third-party candidates and in trying to include us. However, that is not always the case, and while we try to grow as much as we can, especially the Green Party, in our local communities, which I have to say the Waterford Green Party being but, I believe, 5 years old, we've had great traction. We have an elected official on a zoning board, and it's slowly coming to the forefront that American politics, both on the national, state, and local levels, need more choices and more ideas out there. I believe it's close to 70% of the American population wants to see a third-party candidate or a third option up there along with the two other presidential candidates. So as for the second part of your question, why is it not a wasted vote? Why is it not throwing away your vote? And the answer is because it's a slow process. If you believe that you are helping to elect somebody who represents your values, because that is our civic duty, is to represent someone who we can stand for, not stand against, then you are helping a candidate who closer represents your values come to the forefront and maybe in the next election have a greater chance of getting to the office in order to represent you.
Ms. Palmer,
Sure.
Your opponent's contention that the other two parties don't play fair, that they're kind of rigging the system. We've heard about rigging the system in this election to kind of minimize the chance of a third party really having a voice.
It's an interesting question. Let me just say that I think that there isn't, at this point in time, a third party that has grown to the point where it can be viable, particularly on the national level. And we certainly have a mess in presidential politics right now. I think there are a significant number of voters that would welcome a third party, but no third party at this point has the traction to be viable in our election scenario. So I would say, most people might disagree with me, that if you vote for a third party, sorry, Lauren, in this election, you are throwing away your vote because there isn't a viable third party. Would I like to see one? I think so. And I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I don't always agree with the Democrats either, even though I do on most policy issues. So it's going to take time to develop a third party, and it probably will not happen in my lifetime. But I think there's enough discontent with the current system that there may be opportunity. We saw the Bernie Sanders phenomena, and it's still going on to a certain extent. So who knows where that will go in the next 10 years, let's say. But I think we need change. I think we need change in our political landscape. We have more and more disenchanted people with the system the way it is now.
Representative McCarty, the contention that the two major parties sort of kind of rigged the rules to keep them in power. And you've been in the legislature specifically on the public campaign financing. The rules are different for third parties and arguably more difficult for them to get the financing.
Right. Well, that's another entire question, and perhaps that can be looked at going forward. But I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate my opponent for her work and what she has done with the Green Party. I do tend to agree with my other opponent that at this stage that it is not really a viable choice given the two parties that are the major parties run in the legislature currently, and that a vote to the Green Party is maybe I don't want to say it's throwing away your vote because it gives somebody an opportunity to make a choice, but I don't think it's going to go too far. I would say that the Republicans rigging not on the local level, because we certainly welcome the Green Party on the zoning Board of Appeals, and I think Lauren can vouch for that. There was an open spot, and the Green Party ran for it. So I congratulate the effort to try to educate our citizenry, but I think at this time it's still too premature to say that it's a viable party with a choice. There is, however, another party, the Independent Party, that exists in Connecticut, and so that party, I think, tries to recognize independent thinkers, and I think that's a party that we can look to. Thank you.
And just to clarify, Representative McCarty, I think you've been cross-endorsed by the Independent Party?
Thank you. I have been cross-endorsed by the Independent Party, so giving a shout-out for the Independent Party.
And Sharon Palmer, you're cross-endorsed as well, right? By the Working Families Party.
Right.
Okay.
Happy
Just,
to accept that endorsement.
Okay. Anything else from what you've heard,
Yes,
Lauren?
I have many points to make back to my opponents.
Okay, we'll give you a last shot on this one.
Give me a last shot. So, to the argument that it's not viable because nobody else is going to vote for a third-party candidate is just a circular and self-defeating argument, because if nobody's going to vote for the candidate, why should I vote for them? Because it doesn't make sense. So you should really be looking at candidates who represent your values instead of voting against candidates who don't. There are options that we have been on the Green Party platform that would help limit some of this two-party duopoly, as it really is, as far as ranked choice voting goes, as far as randomized ballot selection, so that you can't just vote down the line. I believe there's a saying, 1A, Democrats all the way, I believe is the saying. And really, the fact that, especially in the presidential season we're seeing now, people are saying, well, I don't like so-and-so, so I'm going to vote for the other candidate, I think is what really got us into this mess of lesser, it's the lesser of two evils. And particularly, I look at it and go, well, you're still voting for evil. And I'd really like to see citizens step up, maybe even if you still believe that you're wasting your vote, but just voting for something instead of against something would be a good change for American politics.
All right, thank you. That brings us to our next question. We'll start with Representative McCarty. Speaking of the choices at the top of the ballot, who do you plan to vote for, and who are you supporting in the presidential race?
Thank you. I've been a longstanding leader in the Republican Party, both at the local, state, and national levels. And unfortunately, the current nominee, in my opinion, I've worked very hard to advocate the values and principles of the Republican Party over many decades. The nominee does not represent, in my estimation, those values and those principles. So it's been a very heart-wrenching time throughout this entire campaign for me, because I feel very dedicated to my party, but I am unable to cast my vote for the nominee, Donald Trump, in this election. On the other hand, I would like to add that I am not supporting Hillary Clinton either. She does not represent my values either, and I am not able to get behind her economic and policy or foreign policies. And so we just talked about throwing away a vote. Unfortunately, I feel marginalized because I know that not voting for one of the major candidates will probably be a lost vote. I'm planning to have a write-in. I'm still thinking about it. I'm leaning toward Paul Ryan at the moment. But again, I'd like to just say that I'm a loyal Republican. I'll continue to fight. I think that the hundreds of votes that I've cast over this past term in the legislature should overshadow the one vote that I may cast for the presidency. A lot of the work that needs to be done here on the state takes place at the local and the state level. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Shaw?
I am not in a precarious position. I am proud to support my party's presidential nominee, Dr. Jill Stein, who has been an active political voice for those who are disenfranchised. I feel like she is the only true feminist in the race. I feel that she is the only one who can bring us to a place of peace and who can address properly the climate issues facing us. She's the only true progressive in the race, and that is why I am proud to support her. And back to our former conversation, having two candidates such as Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is exactly the argument you need to make to cast your vote for someone who will be on the ballot, like Dr. Jill Stein will be in Connecticut, instead of, wasting a vote by writing it in.
And Sharon Palmer.
Well, as you might surmise, I will be voting for Hillary Clinton. I have been a lifelong Democrat since I was old enough to vote, and probably will continue to be so, though I did vote once for a Republican, and I won't say who that was, but I did
Keep
vote
us in suspense.
once for a Republican. I think the two-party system works. We're not, as I said
That's in your
earlier,
favor?
ready for a third party. The Democratic Party and our nominee, Hillary Clinton, for the most part represent values that I support. And so that's where I'm going come November 8th.
All right. Our next question is from Martha Shanahan to Sharon Palmer.
Do you support the creation of a third casino in Connecticut? And if so, should it be restricted to operation by the Mohegan and Mashantucket Pequot tribes or open to other bidders?
That's a tough question for me. I have been ambivalent about casinos from the very beginning, primarily because of my volunteer work with United Way and what I see happens with gambling addiction and problems within families as a result of gambling. I volunteered also on a gambling task force. And what I've seen is a great amount of improvement in the way we deal with folks who have problems with gambling. It's much better than it used to be. Families lost their homes, families lost their jobs, their cars, everything under the sun when the casinos first started. Families broke up. I don't think we see as much of that now, but we have to be very mindful of gambling addiction and make sure that we have services available if we decide to do a third casino. Certainly, I would not like to see another casino right here in this area, perhaps in another part of the state. And it shouldn't be a monopoly for two tribes. It should be open for management by other groups as well. And I would hope that we would have enough safeguards in place to minimize all the problems that come with gambling addiction.
All right, thank you. Representative McCarty?
Yes, I do favor casino expansion. I did vote in the legislature to allow the casinos to go forward to see if there was a place within the state that would be suitable for a third casino. But my primary reason for taking that vote, which was because we need to protect our businesses and our revenue here, and we have so many employees in this region particularly that work at the casinos, and it was in an effort to save their jobs because the competition coming from Massachusetts would be so great and would draw away so many of the jobs and put the casinos in a even more downward spiral. They've had to struggle over the years to keep the business that they have. So my vote really was to protect my constituents. I do agree with my opponent that we need to do more on the social piece to educate better and communicate better about gambling addiction. There is a problem, but I've approached that with the casino executives, and their pledge is to continue to work in that area as well. So basically, and I think a report just came out, though, that we're having trouble finding an area up even in the around the Hartford area for a new casino. There was some talk about moving it maybe to the southwestern part of the state where they think that more revenue. I would prefer to see something in that Hartford region so that we could help this part of the state with the jobs that we need so desperately here. So in answer, I did support investigating. I think at this time it should be limited to the current 2 tribes that we have. I think that could open up another range of legal questioning if it goes beyond that at this point as to who is and who isn't able to bid for the project. So I hope I answered that.
Well, thank you. And Ms. Shaw.
Yes, thank you. In a time when we are hard-pressed to find businesses that actually want to come in and develop in Connecticut, I certainly would not deny anybody who wants to develop in Connecticut. So I believe at this point I am in favor of developing another casino. I do agree that perhaps we should push it up in the corner near Massachusetts. My issue lies mainly in the speed at which this project has been taking place. I know that we are in a race against Massachusetts developers, and I'd really want to make sure that whatever development plan is chosen is best for those who live in the area where the casino is being developed, and for the Connecticut taxpayers at large.
And a follow-up jobs question for you. Next question to you, Lauren Shaw, is the Green Party platform calls for cutting defense spending by at least 50%, perhaps more. We live in an area highly dependent on defense spending, electric boat, we have a major submarine base. So why would voters in this area ever consider supporting the Green Party given that platform?
That platform is definitely on the national level, and I think specifically the work being done in Groton and New London at General Dynamics and Electric Boat. I suppose I'll preface this by saying I'm a proud Navy brat. I have family who works for the Navy. I have family who works at EB. Those jobs are very important to me, and although we do call for not only a decrease in defense spending on the national stage, but the complete cessation of war. But I think really what's going on at EB, the development of those submarines, that's not necessarily a project geared towards war. I would say that's something that we're going to need in the future as we move more into the Arctic, as operations move that way, that we will need for defense. And so let's see, your question would be, why should you support that?
Well, I'd be worried about my job perhaps if the Greens got it.
No, that's completely understandable. I would definitely support keeping the defense industry here in Connecticut. I would say that we need some sort of plan to move away from, production of submarines. You only need so many submarines, and I'd really like to see General Dynamics and Electric Boat have a solid plan in place for when that time comes so that we don't lose those manufacturing jobs. Personally, I would propose a offshore wind manufacturing site. I believe that would be a good use of the skills already here in place, as well as helping move us towards a more green economy.
All right, thank you. With that, we're going to move to our final statements. Each of the candidates will have 1 minute to summarize. And by lot, we pick the order, and we start with Sharon Palmer.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to be here with everyone today. I'm a longtime resident of this area, over 40 years. Served 10 terms on the Waterford RTM from the Quaker Hill District and taught at Clark Lane Middle School. So I'm quite familiar with this part of the state, done a lot of volunteer work, and it would be an honor for me to be the representative from the 39th House District. We've got a lot of work to do. And I think you need people with some experience in both public and private sector, and I have both. I have worked in the private sector and worked for the Department of Defense as well. So I'm hoping that the voters will send me to Hartford and that I can get some good things done for Connecticut and help solve the budget problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative McCarty. Oh, excuse me. My mistake.
Thank you.
Ms. Shaw.
Yes, so here before you lies three choices, one for a rubber stamp for Dan Malloy, another representative who's shown passive resistance to much of the plans that came forward and who has actually voted against our teachers and against our the prospect of future state businesses. I would really say to look into third parties. I would encourage people to vote outside the party lines if you are not satisfied with what Connecticut has shown so far within the Democrat and Republican plans. And I would like to be that voice for the 38th House District.
All right, thank you. Now Representative McCarty.
Thank
My
you.
apologies.
It's been a true privilege and an honor for me to represent the citizens of Waterford and Montville in the state legislature this past term, and I would like to thank them for the faith and the confidence that they have placed in me to do this very hard job during very pressing fiscal times. We really didn't get into it too much this afternoon, but there's a clear choice going forward. We can go back to the same way we're doing business in the state, which has really brought us to almost to the brink of disaster. We need to fix our budget so that we can have our families raised here in Connecticut that can lead good lives and retire here, bring Connecticut back to a prosperous state. The structural changes we mentioned earlier need to take place. The budget, we need to have the Republicans and Democrats coming together in a bipartisan way. I think I've proven that I can talk to both sides, regardless of the criticisms that I've taken here this afternoon. I believe that I've worked very hard representing my constituents, 100% voting record. I am endorsed by the Connecticut businesses. They understand that businesses drive our economy. So he's asking my constituents for their vote on November the 8th. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And that concludes our discussion today. We thank all the candidates for participating. We thank you for watching, and make sure you vote on November 8th. Good afternoon.
Thank you.